Welcome to a deep dive into the amazing world of split brain research. We're diving deep into Tales from Both Sides of the Brain by Michael S. Gazzaniga. And let me tell you, this is way more than just your typical science book.
Oh, absolutely. Gazzaniga, he takes us on this incredible journey, both personal and scientific. You really get a feel for not just the groundbreaking discoveries, but the whole atmosphere surrounding these huge leaps forward in how we understand the brain.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you really get a feel for him as a person. Like, did you know he's actually from California? He even starts the book with this whole story about his mom, called her the original California girl, and how much she just couldn't stand East Coast winters.
Oh, that's a classic. That anecdote about his mom sending that sprig of orange blossoms to their doorstep in New York, buried in snow, I'm sure. He just perfectly captures that, longing for that California sunshine, that spirit.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's what brings the family back to LA, which is where Gazzaniga's journey into the mysteries of the brain really begins.
And where better to do that than, like, 1960s Caltech, right? I mean, talk about a breeding ground for serious brain power. That's where he meets Roger Sperry, this absolute pioneer in split brain research. Can you imagine the energy in that lab?
It was a total hotbed of ideas back then. Gazzaniga describes it as this super vibrant hub. Researchers from all these different fields just constantly bouncing ideas off each other, pushing the boundaries of what they knew about the brain,
Yeah.
challenging each other. Really exciting time to be there.
Okay, so we've got California sunshine, brilliant minds colliding, set the stage. Now get this. This is where it gets really wild. Gazzaniga and his crew, they stumble on this discovery that totally shakes up neuroscience. They find out that the two halves of your brain, the hemispheres, they can actually function like two separate minds.
You have to understand, this idea was like, yeah, right, when it first came out. It was met with so much skepticism, people just flat out didn't buy it at first. It took some seriously clever experiments to really get the point across.
Wow.
And their work with WJ, the very first split brain patient, that's where it all started to click for people.
Okay, so let's talk experiments. How did they actually show this whole two minds thing? What did these experiments look like?
So picture this. WJ is looking straight ahead, okay? Then they flash a circle of light, but only to one side of his vision. When they ask him to point to what he saw, he can only do it with the hand controlled by the same side of the brain that saw the circle. The other hand, controlled by the other half of his brain, couldn't do it.
Whoa, so his brain was literally processing things separately in each half. Must have been mind-blowing to see that for the first time.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't all serious, bitten-up lab coats either. Gazzaniga talks about this really playful rivalry, this back and forth they had going on. He even tells a story about Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, challenging their whole setup, questioning if they had it right.
Oh, yeah. Feynman, the ultimate skeptic. Didn't he say something about the cats in those early experiments, how they might be cheating somehow, messing up the results?
Exactly. Feynman really pushed them to think critically about how they were doing things. He wanted to make sure their research was rock solid. And that's what's so cool about this whole era in neuroscience. Even the big revolutionary ideas, they were always up for debate.
Really shows how important that back and forth is, right? Collaboration, pushing each other to be better. You can practically feel that energy, that excitement, just reading about it. But here's the thing about Gazzaniga. He wasn't just a lab rat, you know? This guy, he's out there rubbing shoulders with all these big thinkers, organizing debates, even trying his hand at event promotion.
He really had a knack for connecting with people. Like that story about him setting up a lecture with William F. Buckley Jr. at Caltech. Not your average science crowd.
And then those debates where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Costs spiraling out of control, the audience going wild. Talk about a crash course in event planning.
It just goes to show you, Gazzaniga, he wasn't afraid to take risks. Brilliant scientist, for sure, but also this playful, adventurous side.
It's a good reminder that scientists are real people too, you know? They've got their own things they're passionate about, quirks, a thirst for life beyond the lab. Sometimes those experiences outside the lab, they can actually influence their work in ways they never expected. But we should probably move on to the next chapter of Gazzaniga's story. Things are about to get really interesting as his journey takes him across the country, encountering some groundbreaking new ideas along the way. So last we left off, Gazzaniga's, well, he's this charismatic scientist, hanging out with intellectuals, even jumping into these high-stakes debates. But this journey of his, it takes him away from sunny California, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. His thirst for knowledge, it takes him all the way to the East Coast, NYU. That's where he meets this guy, Leon Festinger. Total legend. really shaped Gazzaniga's thinking, especially with this whole cognitive dissonance theory.
Okay, yeah, cognitive dissonance, I've definitely heard of it, but to be honest, I could use a little refresher.
Right.
What's so groundbreaking about it?
Well, Festinger, he was fascinated by how our minds deal with things that clash, you know, beliefs that don't line up. Like imagine you believe in something so strongly, it's like fundamental to you. Then bam, you get hit with information that totally contradicts it. That, my friend, is cognitive dissonance in action.
And it's not just like a curious thing our brains do, right? Gazzaniga tells this story, it's almost like a psychological thriller about Festinger studying this doomsday cult.
Oh yeah, the one with Mrs. Keach. These people, they were absolutely convinced the world was ending, like on a specific date. Gave up everything, jobs, houses, relationships, the whole 9 yards, all based on this belief.
Okay, so the big day comes, and the world doesn't end, obviously. You'd figure that'd be it for the cult, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But here's where that cognitive dissonance kicks in. Instead of admitting they were wrong, they doubled down hard. They actually convinced themselves their prayers because they were praying so hard they'd save the world.
Wow, so their brains basically rewrote reality to avoid being wrong, to make everything fit with what they already believed.
Exactly. And Gazzaniga, he points out that this study, it wasn't just some interesting story. It really got him thinking about the brain in a new way. This need we have for things to make sense, even if it means bending the truth a little, it's like a core part of who we are.
Makes you wonder how often our own brains are doing this without us even realizing, right?
It's kind of a scary thought, isn't it? But that's just the start of Gazzaniga's East Coast adventure. He ends up at SUNY Stony Brook, builds this dedicated research team, and get this, they're all piling into a bright orange van.
Hold on, a bright orange van, seriously.
Yep, bright orange. Picture this. Gazzaniga, his team, bundled up, driving through the snow, their equipment rattling around in the back, all to figure out the mysteries of this split brain. Shows you how dedicated they were, you know. Real adventurous spirit.
It's like a movie montage waiting to happen. Really shows that scientific breakthroughs, it's not always fancy labs and high-tech gear. Sometimes it's about pure grit, you know, and maybe a good pair of snow tires.
And that dedication, it pays off big time. Don't forget, split brain research, it was still pretty new territory back then. Every experiment, every new piece of data was pushing the boundaries of what they knew about the brain. And let me tell you, Gazzaniga and his team, they were about to uncover something truly revolutionary.
Okay, so we've got Gazzaniga and the team braving the elements in their trusty orange van, all in the name of split brain research. What's next for them?
Well, their research takes them to Dartmouth. Gazzaniga sets up a brand new lab there. And this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, so?
They're not held back by old technology anymore. They've got fMRI, eye tracking, all this cutting-edge stuff. They can study the split brain better than ever before.
It's amazing how far we've come, right? But Gazzaniga, he's not just refining old theories with these new toys. He's coming up with totally new ideas, like this interpreter concept. What's that all about?
Okay, so think of it like this. Your brain, it's this crazy complex system. All these different parts, right? Modules. Each one with its own little job.
Okay, yeah.
Now, how do all those independent pieces come together to create, like, you, your conscious experience?
Right, it's one you, even with all those parts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's when the interpreter comes in. Gazzaniga, he thinks it's mostly in the left half of the brain. And it's working behind the scenes constantly, taking information from all those different brain modules, weaving it all together, creates a story, a narrative. That's what we experience as our conscious awareness.
So it's like the brain's own personal storyteller.
Kind of. But if it's so busy making a story, does that mean it can, I don't know, fill in gaps, maybe even make things up to make the story better?
Ooh, interesting.
Well, that's what Gazzaniga's research seems to show. He did these experiments, right? Showed split brain patients these images that told a little story. Simple story. Later on, he shows them a mix of old and new images.
Okay, so what happens?
The left hemisphere, the one with the interpreter, it confidently recognized images that were never actually part of the original story. They just fit the narrative it had created.
Wait, so our brains, they just make stuff up sometimes.
It seems that way. It really makes you question what we think of as, like, real. But it also shows how amazing the brain is, how adaptable. This interpreter, it's always trying to make sense of things, even if it has to bend the rules a little.
We're hardwired for stories, even if they're not always perfectly true.
Exactly. And remember JW, that long-term research participant we talked about?
Yeah.
So, for years, his right hemisphere, it was considered silent. Couldn't use language to communicate.
Right.
And then, boom, He starts giving these visual descriptions, but from that silent side.
No way, after all that time.
Yep. Totally changed how people saw the right hemisphere. Showed it had all this hidden potential, all these abilities they never knew about. Really opened up this whole can of worms about how the two hemispheres might communicate, even after being separated for years.
It makes you wonder what else is hidden in there, just waiting for us to find it.
It's incredible. And Gazzaniga, he wasn't just making these scientific discoveries. He was thinking about what they meant, for all of us. Didn't just want to stay in the lab. He wanted to understand how it all fit into the bigger picture of what it means to be human.
He was thinking big picture.
Absolutely. He ends up on the President's Council on Bioethics, talking about the really tough questions, like the ethical dilemmas of all this new neuroscience stuff. Gazzaniga, he gets it. Scientific progress, it has to be part of a larger conversation. We can't ignore the ethical side of things.
So where does that leave us then? We've gone deep into this world of split brain research, Gazzaniga as our guide. What should we take away from all this?
That the brain, it's even more complex, more amazing than we thought. And the more we learn, the more questions pop up, the more ethical challenges. But that's how it should be. It's that curiosity, that drive to understand that's going to lead us to a better understanding of what it means to be human.
It's a journey of discovery.
That's it, exactly.
And who knows, maybe those orange blossoms Gazzaniga's mom loved so much, maybe they were more than just missing California. Maybe they were a sign pointing to that bright, interconnected, amazing world inside our own heads. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.